The sun beat down on Harmony Meadows, a meticulously planned community where every blade of grass seemed to stand at attention and every house sported the same shade of beige. Life in Harmony Meadows was governed by the Harmony Meadows Homeowners Association, or HOA, a body whose influence extended from the color of your mailbox to the length of your petunias. For some residents, the HOA was a benevolent overlord, ensuring property values and community cohesion. For others, it was a tyrannical force, stifling individuality and enforcing rules that seemed designed to irritate rather than improve. Sarah Jenkins, a recent transplant to Harmony Meadows, was quickly discovering which camp she belonged to. She had moved in with visions of peaceful suburban bliss, envisioning barbecues in her backyard and quiet evenings on her porch swing. Instead, she found herself navigating a labyrinth of bylaws, regulations, and passive-aggressive notes left on her door. Her first infraction had been the placement of a whimsical gnome in her flower bed, deemed inappropriate by the HOA Architectural Committee. The gnome, affectionately named Norman, now resided in her garage, a prisoner of suburban conformity. Sarah wasn't alone in her frustrations. Old Man Fitzwilliam, a resident of Harmony Meadows since its inception, had waged a decades-long war against the HOA over the height of his hedges. His once magnificent rose bushes, prized for their vibrant blooms, had been pruned into submission, reduced to mere green cubes in accordance with HOA regulations. Fitzwilliam, a man of principle and a lover of natural beauty, saw the HOA as an enemy of both. Then there was Mrs. Higgins, a sweet, elderly woman whose meticulously tended garden was the envy of the neighborhood. Even she had felt the sting of the HOA's iron fist. Her bird feeder, a haven for finches and sparrows, had been deemed a nuisance and ordered removed. Mrs. Higgins, heartbroken at the loss of her feathered friends, now secretly scattered birdseed on her lawn, risking the wrath of the HOA patrol. The HOA was led by a board of 5 residents, each with their own agenda and interpretation of the rules. There was Mr. Peterson, the president, a man obsessed with order and uniformity, who saw the HOA as a way to impose his vision of perfection on the community. Mrs. Vanderlyn, the treasurer, was a stickler for finances, scrutinizing every expense and demanding detailed reports from the other board members. Mr. Johnson, the head of the architectural committee, was the self-appointed arbiter of taste, dictating everything from paint colors to landscaping designs. The other 2 members, Mrs. Davis and Mr. Lee, were generally quiet, going along with the decisions of the more vocal members. The annual HOA meeting was a spectacle, a battleground where residents aired their grievances and the board defended its policies. This year's meeting promised to be particularly contentious. Rumors were swirling about a proposed increase in HOA dues, a new regulation regarding lawn ornaments, and a controversial plan to replace the aging community pool with a state-of-the-art fitness center. Sarah, emboldened by her fellow rebels, decided to attend the meeting, determined to make her voice heard. She had prepared a list of grievances, including the gnome incident, the restrictions on garden decorations, and the general air of oppressive conformity that permeated Harmony Meadows. She even considered bringing Norman as a symbol of her protest, but ultimately decided against it, fearing further repercussions. The meeting hall was packed. Residents sat in folding chairs, their faces a mixture of apprehension and anger. The board members sat at a long table at the front, looking like judges about to deliver a verdict. Mr. Peterson opened the meeting with a dry recitation of the HOA's accomplishments, highlighting the pristine condition of the landscaping and the high property values. He then announced the proposed dues increase, citing rising maintenance costs and the need for capital improvements. A murmur of discontent rippled through the room. Old Man Fitzwilliam stood up, his face flushed with anger. "You call these improvements?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. "You've turned this community into a sterile, soulless place. You dictate what we can plant, what colors we can paint our houses, even what we can put in our yards. It's tyranny, I tell you." Mrs. Higgins, her voice trembling, spoke about the loss of her bird feeder. "The birds brought so much joy," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "Now they're gone. This community used to be a place of beauty and life. Now it's just rules and regulations. Sarah, taking a deep breath, stood up. She spoke about Norman, the gnome banished to her garage. She spoke about the stifling atmosphere of Harmony Meadows, where individuality was discouraged and conformity was enforced. "We're not asking for anarchy," she said. "We just want a little freedom, a little room to express ourselves. We want to live in a community where we can be ourselves, not clones of each other." The room erupted in applause. Even some of the more conservative residents nodded in agreement. The board members looked uncomfortable, taken aback by the outpouring of dissent. Mr. Peterson tried to regain control of the meeting, but his voice was drowned out by the chorus of complaints. The meeting went on for hours, a long, drawn-out battle between the residents and the HOA board. The proposed dues increase was met with fierce opposition. The lawn ornament regulation was tabled for further discussion. The plan to replace the pool was met with mixed reactions. Some residents excited about the prospect of a new fitness center, others lamenting the loss of the old pool. By the end of the meeting, no clear resolutions had been reached. But something had shifted in Harmony Meadows. The residents had found their voice. They had discovered that they were not alone in their frustrations. They had realized that they had the power to challenge the HOA and demand change. In the weeks that followed, a group of residents, including Sarah, Fitzwilliam, and Mrs. Higgins, formed a committee to address the HOA's policies. They drafted a petition calling for greater transparency and more resident input in HOA decisions. They organized meetings to discuss alternative solutions to the community's problems. The HOA board, sensing the changing tide, began to soften its stance. They agreed to hold more open forums to discuss proposed changes. They even considered revising some of the more restrictive regulations. Slowly but surely, Harmony Meadows began to change. Norman was liberated from his garage prison and placed back in Sarah's flowerbed, a symbol of the community's newfound embrace of individuality. Fitzwilliam's roses, no longer confined to geometric shapes, began to bloom in all their glory. Mrs. Higgins' bird feeder reappeared, attracting a flock of grateful birds. The transformation wasn't complete. There were still disagreements and challenges. But the residents of Harmony Meadows had learned a valuable lesson.